The wind carried the kind of silence that only comes after screams. Each gust scraped across the desert like a whisper of the dead. Beneath the twisted cottonwood tree, 5 figures swayed, their wrists bound high, their bare feet brushing the dry earth that refused to give them rest. The ropes had burned their skin raw. Their bodies trembled, too weak to fight, too proud to break. They were Apache women, sisters by blood or by pain, and the desert had become their cross. When the first one spoke, her voice was a thread of dust and prayer. "Please, if anyone can hear us." No echo answered, only the hiss of wind through bone-dry branches. Then, hooves, slow at first, like a heartbeat returning to a dying world. A man rode into the clearing, his hat low against the glare, badge dulled by sand and regret. Deputy Thomas Briggs hadn't planned to stop, not here. He was tracking killers, not ghosts. But when he saw the rope cut deep into the wrist of the youngest girl, maybe 16, maybe less, something inside him cracked. He swung off his horse, every step sinking into the dust of a land that had buried too many. "Who did this to you?" The oldest lifted her head, eyes dark as storm water. "Men without mercy," she whispered. "They'll come back when the sun dies." Thomas looked at the horizon, red, bleeding into night. He had 2 choices, ride away or raise his knife. The law said walk on. His heart said cut the rope. The blade flashed once in the dying light. The rope snapped. And in that moment, before her body fell into his arms, the desert seemed to hold its breath, as if it, too, knew that one small act of mercy had just rewritten the fate of everyone still breathing. Before we find out what happens next, tell me, what time is it where you're listening from? And if you want to ride along for more tales of courage, subscribe now. Now, let's see what waited for them in the dark. The girl in his arms gasped for air, as if the whole desert had been trapped inside her chest. Thomas eased her down against the roots of the tree, cutting the next rope before the others could collapse under their own weight. When the last strand of hemp fell, silence swallowed the grove, that heavy kind of silence that follows sin. 5 women stood trembling, wrists raw, faces streaked with dirt and defiance. The oldest stepped forward. Her posture was unbroken, even after hours hanging in the heat. "My name is Ayanna Nakai," she said quietly. "These are my sisters, Kiana, Tallulah, Rhea, and little Mara." Thomas nodded once, tipping his hat out of respect. "Deputy Thomas Briggs, U.S. Marshal Service." He offered his canteen, watched as Ayanna passed it to the youngest first. A small act, but one that told him everything about who she was. "Who did this?" he asked. Ayanna's jaw tightened. "A band of men from the mining camps. They said our people hid something in these lands, gold, silver, something they crave." Her gaze turned toward the western ridge, where the sun had bled into the cliffs. "They'll return when it's dark." Thomas scanned the horizon. His horse pawed nervously at the ground. "Then we'd better ride before they do." But Ayanna shook her head. "No, Marshal, we can't run from them, not anymore." The words landed heavy. They weren't fear, they were resolve. Thomas studied her, the strength in her eyes, the dust streaking her cheek like war paint. "Runnin' sounds smarter than dyin'," he muttered. Ayanna's reply was soft, but it cut sharper than his knife. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything and still breathe. We already died once when they took our home." The desert wind hissed through the cottonwoods. For a moment he heard only the creak of old wood and his own heartbeat. He'd buried partners, lost family, and once believed the badge on his chest could still make the world right. But standing here, he wasn't sure what right meant anymore. He helped the sisters mount his horse and the few half-broken mares the gang had left tied nearby. As they rode south toward the dying light, Ayanna spoke again, low and certain. "They'll come for us, Marshal, and when they do, you'll see what justice costs in this land." Thomas didn't answer. He only looked back once at the tree, the ropes swaying empty in the wind like ghosts of choices already made. He had no idea that saving them would cost him everything he believed about justice. The moon rose red over the desert, casting long shadows across the sand. Their horses moved slow and silent, hooves sinking into the soft ground of the dry creek bed. Behind them, the wind carried faint echoes, the sound of men shouting, and somewhere far off, the crack of a rifle. "They're coming," Kiona whispered. Thomas didn't turn his head. "How far?" "Close enough to smell the whiskey on their breath," she answered, voice trembling but steady. He pulled the reins tighter. "We keep moving south. There's a canyon ahead, Devil's Canyon. If we reach it by dawn, maybe we'll have the rocks at our back." Ayanna looked to the horizon, where the land rose in jagged teeth against the stars. "I've heard stories about that place," she said. "They say no one comes out the same." Thomas gave a half smile, dry as dust. "No one walks into hell and comes back clean." A rifle cracked again, closer this time. The youngest, Mara, flinched, clutching her sister's arm. Thomas spurred his horse forward. "Ride! Don't look back!" The desert exploded into motion, hooves pounding, wind screaming through the sage. Sand stung their faces as they raced through the open flats, the night burning with pursuit. In the distance, the flicker of torches marked the riders closing in. They reached a rocky ridge and paused to breathe. Thomas scanned the darkness, eyes narrowing. "There's more," he muttered. "Dust trails from the south, another group." Ayanna followed his gaze. "The garrison gang in front and someone else behind." Thomas cursed under his breath. "We're caught between wolves." Kiana lifted her rifle, an old Winchester, polished and ready. "Then we hunt the hunters." Thomas looked at her, surprised. "You can shoot?" Ayanna's answer came sharp, proud. "We're Apache, Marshal. We were born knowing how." For a long moment, only the wind spoke between them. Then Thomas nodded. "If you ride with me," he said quietly, "there's no turning back." Ayanna's eyes glinted in the moonlight. "We burned our bridges the day they hanged us." They dismounted near a narrow ravine, tying the horses low. Thomas crouched, scanning tracks by the torchlight's reflection on the sand. 6 men ahead, maybe more. They're slowing down, making camp near the canyon mouth. He brushed the dirt from his fingers. Overconfident fools. Rhea adjusted the knife at her belt. "Then we strike before they wake." Thomas hesitated. "You're in no shape to fight." Ayanna stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "Marshal, we didn't survive the rope just to run again." There was something in her tone, not vengeance, but purpose, deep as the desert. He saw it in all their faces, bruised, exhausted, but alive with that fierce light born of pain and pride. "Fine," he said finally. "We move before sunrise. Quiet, fast, no mistakes." He glanced toward the canyon, a black wound in the earth, waiting. "But if this goes wrong, none of us walk out." Ayanna looked past him into the dark. "We'll walk out," she said, "because we still have something to protect." Thomas frowned. "Gold?" She shook her head slowly. "No, Marshal, something far more dangerous than gold." Her hand pressed to her chest. "Our father left us the knowledge of where the rivers run, beneath the desert. Water that can feed a nation, or make men kill for eternity." The words sank into him like a bullet. Water, the one thing this land would always need, the one thing every man would spill blood to control. He met her eyes, steady and unyielding. "Then we better make sure it stays in the right hands." The wind rose again, cold and merciless, carrying with it the echo of pursuit. Behind them, faint torchlight crept over the dunes. Ahead, Devil's Canyon waited, black, silent, and hungry. Thomas drew his revolver and whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "Let's see if the devil still remembers mercy." The first shot tore through the canyon air before dawn. It echoed off the stone walls like thunder rolling through a cathedral. Thomas dropped to one knee, revolver drawn, the smell of gunpowder mixing with desert sage. The gang had found them. 8 riders, shadows moving fast through the mouth of Devil's Canyon, torches in one hand, rifles in the other. Their leader, a tall man in a deputy's coat, rode at the front, the firelight glinting off a silver star pinned crooked to his vest. Ayanna froze when she saw him. Her breath hitched like someone seeing a ghost. "Uncle," she whispered. Thomas turned, caught the tremor in her voice. "Your uncle?" Her jaw tightened. Sheriff Patterson. The realization hit Thomas like a bullet. The lawman leading the hunt, her own blood. "Marshal Briggs," Patterson's voice boomed through the canyon. "You've got something that belongs to me." "Step aside, and I'll forget you ever saw these savages," Thomas called back, voice echoing cold and steady. "They're under federal protection. You cross that line, you answer to me." Patterson laughed, a hollow, cruel sound that bounced between the rocks. "Federal protection?" he mocked. "There's no government here, Marshal. Out here, the only law that matters is the one that survives the night." The torches began to move, circling. Thomas ducked behind a boulder, firing once. One man fell. Kiona and Tallulah moved like spirits in the dark, their rifles whispering death through smoke. Rhea shouted something in Apache, a war cry that made the canyon walls tremble. Then came the flames. Patterson's men threw burning tar into the narrow pass, the fire catching fast on dry brush. The canyon became a furnace, light and shadow twisting together like living things. "Back!" Thomas shouted. "Fall back to the rocks!" He fired again, then felt the impact, a hot punch through his shoulder. He hit the ground hard, blood soaking his sleeve. Through the haze, Ayanna ran to him, dragging him behind a stone outcrop as bullets chewed into the rock. "You're hit," she said, pressing her scarf against the wound. Thomas gritted his teeth. "Why save me?" Ayanna met his gaze, calm, fierce, unbroken. "Because mercy," she said softly, "is the hardest bullet to fire." For a heartbeat, everything stilled, the crack of guns fading beneath her words. Then, from the ridge above, Rhea shouted, "They're flanking!" Ayanna rose, rifle in hand. "Stay down." Thomas tried to grab her arm. "You'll be killed." She looked down at him, eyes shining in the firelight. "We already were." She darted out, moving low through smoke and flame. Thomas forced himself up, pain blurring his vision. He saw Patterson's men closing in, 6 left, maybe 5. The canyon's narrow walls turned every gunshot into thunder. Rhea and Kiona fired from above, driving the riders into confusion. Thomas caught sight of Patterson through the fire. The man was calm, deliberate, his revolver aimed right at Ayanna. "No!" Thomas roared, stepping out of cover and firing. The shot struck Patterson's arm, spinning him backward. The sheriff cursed, clutching his wound. "You're siding with them?" "I'm siding with what's left of my soul," Thomas yelled back. The blaze lit Patterson's face, not anger now, but disbelief. "You think you know justice?" he spat. "Those women are liars. They killed white settlers, stole from God-fearing men." Ayanna shouted over the flames, voice clear and cutting. "You murdered 37 of our people and called it peace." The words hit harder than any bullet. Even the fire seemed to falter under the weight of them. Thomas's revolver was empty. He reached for his last cartridge, hands slick with blood. Behind him, Rhea and Tallulah descended the ridge, moving like shadows, covering the sisters as they regrouped. Smoke swallowed the canyon. The air shimmered with heat, dust, and something darker, the weight of truth long buried. When the wind shifted, Patterson's men were gone. Some fled, some fallen. Only the sheriff remained, crouched behind a burning cart, nursing his wound. Thomas limped toward him, gun lowered but ready. "Drop it, Patterson. It's over." Patterson looked up, his face smeared with soot and pride. "Over?" he rasped. "You don't even know what this fight is about." Ayanna stepped forward, rifle steady. "Then tell him." Patterson laughed bitterly. "Your father thought he could keep it secret. The map, the rivers, the gold. But secrets like that don't belong to one tribe. They belong to whoever's strong enough to hold them." Thomas stared at him, the pieces falling into place. "This isn't about gold," he said quietly. "It's about power, the kind that outlives men like you." A gust of wind blew through the canyon, scattering sparks into the sky. For a long time, none of them spoke. Then Patterson lowered his weapon. "You can't save them, Marshal. The whole territory will come hunting once they know what those maps are worth." Thomas holstered his gun. "Then I guess I'll have to start by hunting the truth." Ayanna looked at him, exhausted, ash clinging to her hair like frost. For the first time, her eyes softened. "You've already begun." The fire behind them roared higher, swallowing the last of the night. And in that terrible light, red, gold, and holy, they realized something unspoken. The war they were fighting wasn't for gold, or revenge, or even survival. It was for faith, the faith that mercy, somewhere beneath the ashes, might still be stronger than fire. The canyon burned for hours before dawn finally pushed the darkness back. Smoke curled above the ridges like a warning to heaven itself. Thomas stood at the edge of the camp, shoulder bound in a strip of cloth torn from Ayanna's shawl, his badge blackened from the heat. Behind him, the sisters were silent, 5 silhouettes against the ash-gray horizon. Rhea was tending to the wounded horse. Kiona kept watch from the rocks. Ayanna sat apart, hands clasped, staring into the smoldering fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost prayerful. "You could still leave, Marshal. You did what was right. You saved us." Thomas shook his head. If that was right, it shouldn't feel this heavy. He looked at the badge in his hand, a circle of dull metal warped from the flames. This thing was supposed to mean something. Justice, order, the law. But out here... He let the badge fall into the dirt. "It weighs less than a man's soul." Ayanna turned to him, eyes soft but unyielding. The law was written by men who never bled for this land. Justice, real justice, is older than their words. A rustle echoed from the shadows beyond the rocks. Thomas drew his gun, too slow. From the gloom stepped Sheriff Patterson, sleeves soaked in dried blood, revolver steady. Behind him, 2 riders remained, battered but alive. "Put down the gun, Marshal," Patterson ordered. "You're obstructing lawful duty." Thomas's tone was low, measured. "Lawful duty? You burned villages, hung women. That's not law. That's greed in a badge." Patterson smirked, eyes cold. "You think this is about greed? You have no idea what you're standing on." He gestured toward the canyon floor. "Under your feet lies enough silver and water to feed 1,000 towns. Control that, and you control the future of the territory." Thomas felt the ground shift beneath him, not the earth, but the weight of what he'd just heard. Ayanna rose slowly, stepping between them. "And to own the future, you'd bury the past, our people's graves, our children's names." Patterson's revolver lifted a fraction higher. "This land doesn't belong to ghosts." Ayanna's voice didn't rise, but every word cut clean. "Then maybe that's why it keeps killing men like you." The tension was a living thing now, pulsing between them, firelight flickering on gunmetal. Thomas's finger hovered near his trigger, heart pounding against ribs. He'd spent his whole life chasing justice through the letter of the law, but the law had led him here, facing another man with the same badge, the same title, and none of the soul. "Marshal," Patterson said, almost kindly, "you don't have to die for them. Walk away, and I'll forget this ever happened." Thomas's voice was quiet, but every syllable rang true. "I can't walk away from the truth anymore." The sheriff laughed once, sharp, brittle. "Truth won't save you." "No," Thomas said, "but faith might." Ayanna reached into the folds of her cloak and pulled out a bundle wrapped in deer hide. She unrolled it slowly, revealing faded lines drawn on animal skin, maps marked with symbols like flowing rivers and stars. "This," she said, "is what our father died to protect. The rivers beneath the desert, the breath of the earth itself." Thomas stared, awestruck. "All this time, it wasn't gold." Ayanna nodded. "Gold blinds men, but water keeps them alive." Patterson's eyes widened with greedy wonder. Those maps belonged to the territory. "Hand them over, or I'll shoot every one of you where you stand." Thomas stepped in front of Ayanna, voice low but iron hard. "You'll have to shoot through me." For a moment, everything hung in stillness. The heat, the smoke, the morning light cutting between them like judgment. Then Patterson sneered. "So be it." His revolver twitched upward, and in that same breath, Thomas fired. The sheriff's hat flew off as the bullet grazed his cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. He stumbled back, stunned more by defiance than pain. Thomas advanced, gun leveled, eyes calm. "You said the law belongs to whoever survives the night. Looks like daylight's here." Patterson lowered his weapon slowly, hatred simmering behind his smirk. "This isn't over, Marshal. You can't fight the law." Thomas holstered his revolver. "Maybe not, but I can fight for justice." As Patterson retreated into the rising light, Ayanna stepped closer, her hand brushing Thomas's arm. "You risked everything for us," she whispered. Thomas looked at her, dust, sweat, and something like peace in her eyes. "Maybe that's the price of faith," he said softly. "You pay before you believe." Above them, the first rays of dawn touched the canyon walls, painting gold over ruin. And somewhere in that light, it felt, for the first time, like mercy was winning. The sun climbed slowly over the canyon rim, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. The fire had long died out, leaving only smoke trails curling into the morning sky. The air smelled of dust, sage, and something gentler, like rain remembered. Thomas sat on a rock near the riverbed that had been dry the night before. Now, a faint trickle of water ran through the sand, clear as glass, catching the light. He watched it in silence, his revolver holstered, his hand wrapped around the place where his badge used to rest. Behind him, the sisters moved quietly among the ashes of what had been a battleground. Rhea gathered the spent shells and buried them under stones. Kiona whispered a prayer in Apache, words Thomas couldn't understand, but the tone was peace, not war. Little Mara hummed softly while helping Tallulah lay down a blanket near the horses. Ayanna was the last to rise. She walked toward the canyon mouth, her hair loosened, her face streaked with soot and sunlight. In her hands, she carried a wooden sign, old, cracked, half-burned, its faded letters barely legible. Nakai Springs. Thomas stood as she approached. "You found it," he said quietly. Ayanna nodded. "Our father carved it when this place still had life." Together, they planted the sign again, at the water's edge where the trickle had begun to sing. The hammering of wooden stakes echoed softly, each strike less about claiming land and more about remembering it. When the sign stood firm, Ayanna stepped back, brushing the dust from her hands. She smiled again, Thomas thought, watching her face catch the light, for the first time in years. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred, a silence that belonged to peace earned, not given. He took his badge from his pocket, turning it once between his fingers. The metal caught the sun, flashing like a mirror of who he'd been, a man who believed law was enough. Then, slowly, he knelt and pressed it into the soil beside the sign. "Maybe law means nothing without compassion," he said. Ayanna looked at him, her eyes bright but soft. "Then maybe compassion is the law that never fails," she answered. A breeze swept through the canyon, warm and sweet, carrying the faint laughter of the sisters as they filled canteens from the spring. Somewhere above them, a hawk circled, silent witness to the morning. Thomas sat beside the stream, watching the ripples dance around stones scorched black from the night before. "Will you rebuild here?" he asked. Ayanna nodded slowly. "Yes, not to claim what was ours, but to remember why it mattered." He smiled, tired but alive. "Then I reckon you'll need someone who knows how to swing a hammer." Ayanna's lips curved into a small smile. "A marshal who builds instead of burns. That would be new." "Maybe that's what I was meant to be all along," he said. They worked together through the morning, clearing debris, stacking stones, marking the first path of water. The sound of tools against rock became a rhythm, steady and healing, like a heartbeat finding its pace again. When they finally stopped, the sun was high and the canyon glowed golden. Ayanna turned to him, voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere in the canyon," she said, "our ancestors watched and forgave." Thomas felt it then, not in words, but in the quiet weight that lifted from his chest. The desert didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive. He reached for his hat, set it back on his head, and breathed deep. "I reckon forgiveness is the only law that still holds," he murmured. Ayanna nodded, her smile soft as dawn. "And mercy," she added, "always mercy." The wind answered with a sigh through the canyon, not mournful, but grateful. It carried away the last smoke of the night and left behind only light. The sun had climbed high enough to wash the canyon clean. Ashes no longer looked like loss. They looked like soil ready for something new. Thomas stood where the spring began, hat in hand, eyes tracing the slow shimmer of water winding through the sand. He thought about everything the night had taken, and everything it had given back. A man could spend his whole life chasing the law and still never touch justice. He'd learned that justice wasn't a badge or a bullet or even a word written in some book far from here. It was mercy. Quiet, undeserved, and stronger than fire. Ayanna joined him, carrying 2 tin cups. She filled them both at the stream and handed him one. "Tea," she said simply. Thomas smiled, the corner of his mouth lifting. "You always carry tea?" "Always," she replied. "It reminds us that even the hardest earth can still give comfort." They sat in silence, the canyon wind humming like an old hymn. The sisters' laughter echoed in the distance, gentle, alive, unafraid. Thomas raised his cup slightly toward the sun. "Maybe salvation doesn't come from miracles," he said softly, "but from the quiet kindness we give to one another." Ayanna nodded, eyes warm as the light around them. "And maybe mercy," she added, "is the only miracle we ever truly understand." He looked at her then, not as a lawman, not as a savior, but as a man who had finally stopped running. The desert stretched endlessly before them, vast and forgiving. If you were Marshal Briggs, standing in that canyon, would you have chosen the law or mercy? Would you have walked away to keep your badge shining, or would you have laid it down to help strangers find their peace? Tell me what your heart says. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. Leave your thoughts on this Western tale in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please take a second to like the video and subscribe for more true Wild West stories, tales of courage, second chances, and quiet redemption. Pour yourself a cup of tea or maybe a late-night coffee. Take a breath and tell me, what time is it where you're listening from tonight?